Welcome to the Ragnaros 10-man heroic guide within the Firelands raid series. This guide will provide a detailed breakdown for raid leaders and curious viewers, as well as a summarized strategy with role descriptions if you're only interested in the TLDR, both of which are going to be accessible through the timestamps in the description. Ragnaros is the final fight of the tier and can be quite a challenge for most groups. Due to the length of the encounter, the breakdown will be broken into several chapters for this video. We will start with a brief summary of how the encounter looks, then we will go into all the mechanics phase by phase. When all the mechanics have been accounted for, we will conduct a walkthrough of each phase with role descriptions, and as a final part we will go through some strategic tips and tricks. So let's start by taking a look at the fight itself. The fight consists of 4 phases as well as 3 intermissions. All the phase transitions will occur when Ragnaros reaches a certain threshold of his HP. Phase 1 mainly consists of the group dodging magma traps, lava waves, and conducting an occasional tank swap. When Ragnaros hits 70%, we will transition to the first intermission. During this intermission, Ragnaros will place his hammer at a specific point of the arena and spawn 8 fire elementals who will run and try to reach the hammer. Your goal is to kill the fire elementals before they reach the hammer. When all the fire elementals are dead, you will go into phase 2. Phase 2 will inherit 2 mechanics from phase 1, being the tank swap mechanic and the lava waves, which needs to be dodged. Apart from the inherited mechanics, you will now also have to deal with ad spawns and dodging fiery areas on the map. When Ragnaros hits 40% HP, you will enter Intermission 2. This intermission will be centered around the same goal as Intermission 1, being that you have to kill fire elementals before they reach Ragnaros' hammer. To make this harder, you will now also have 2 big ads for the tanks to pick up, and members of your raid will randomly start dropping fire patches beneath their feet. When all the fire elementals are dead, we will go into phase 3. Phase 3 will inherit the tank swap, lava waves, and dodging fire mechanics from previous phases. This phase also sees the introduction of meteors that will spawn and chase random players around the arena. Continue hitting Ragnaros down to 10% HP and you will go into Intermission 3. The third intermission is completely safe and will allow you to position and prepare a bit for Phase 4. Phase 4 will start approximately after 15 seconds. Phase 4 will bring Ragnaros back to 40% HP and all new mechanics are introduced. You will move around frost patches to ignore the environmental damage, you will conduct tank swaps in the same order as before, and kite Ragnaros into some big roots. Apart from this, you will have one player running around and removing fire from the ground so that your group can navigate between the frost patches without dying. And that's it for this brief summary of the entire Ragnaros encounter. Next, we will go into the mechanics of each phase in a bit more detail. Starting off in phase 1, we have 5 mechanics of significance. The first mechanic is called Magma Trap. It launches a trap towards a random player at range distance and will permanently stay on the ground. If you step on the trap after it has landed, it will throw the player into the air and do massive raid damage, as well as applying a debuff to the entire raid. The debuff will increase damage taking by subsequent magma traps. Another important mechanic is called Sulfurous Smash, where Ragnaros will pick a location on the arena and slam it with his hammer. It will send out 3 perpendicular waves from the spawn point, and these need to be dodged. The third mechanic is the referenced tank swap mechanic called Burning Wound. Ragnaros will periodically apply a stacking debuff to his main target, which deals ticking damage and stacks for 20 seconds. The tanks should swap at approximately 4 to 5 stacks. The final 2 mechanics are a ranged and melee knockback. The ranged knockback will target a random player and knock them towards a random direction. The melee knockback blasts anyone in melee range away from Ragnaros and interrupts spellcasting. During Intermission 1, Ragnaros will spawn 8 fire elementals. These have a movement speed buff which is dependent on their current HP, and the lower they get, the slower they move, so you should prioritize hitting all the close targets to down below 50% as soon as you possibly can. During this intermission, Ragnaros will also randomly blast raid members for medium damage. Going into Phase 2, we will inherit the lava waves and tank swap mechanic from Phase 1. Additionally, Ragnaros will cast World in Flames, which sequentially sets 1/3 of the arena on fire. He's going to light up 4 areas of the map in total. The other mechanics of Phase 2 is called Molten Seeds, and after a brief period, Rag will spawn a seed under all players. After a few seconds, the seed will explode, dealing raid-wide damage, and spawns an ad from each of the seeds. Once spawned, the ads will fixate on one person in the raid each and chase them down. When the ads are close to one another, they deal increased damage and receive a damage amplification as well as CC immunity. When Rag reaches 40% HP, you will see Intermission 2. This intermission is similar to the previous one, but now 2 lava scions will also spawn. Tanks should pick these up as they chunk the player with the highest threat for moderate damage. Additionally, players will randomly get the Blazing Heat debuff, dropping fire under their feet, so if you get this, you should run to the edge of the room to create space for your team, or alternatively, you can use immunities as this will instantly remove the debuff. After the second intermission, we will go into Phase 3, where one new mechanic is introduced, called Living Meteor. And after 45 seconds, a meteor will spawn under the feet of a random raid member. The meteor will chase a random target and explode upon impact, dealing massive damage. While the meteor is chasing a person, it will receive a buff every 8 seconds called Combustible. When the meteor is combustible, any direct hit will knock the meteor backwards in a straight line from the attacker, and the meteor will swap the target which it's chasing. Once you get Ragnaros down to 10% HP, you will see Intermission 3, which after a short delay will freeze the meteors on the arena, still allowing them to be knocked with Combustible. During this intermission, Ragnaros will emerge from the lava, and once emerged, Phase 4 will begin. At the start of Phase 4, the meteors will become unfrozen and apply the same mechanics as before. The tank swap mechanic, Burning Wound, is still active during the entirety of Phase 4. Apart from the inherited mechanics, you will now see a few new mechanics. The first new mechanic is called Breath of Frost, which spawns an ice patch at a random location on the map. The frost patches will shield you from the environmental damage which passively stacks up if you're outside the patch, and you will use these patches to handle the remaining meteors from P3. Once any meteor reaches the ice patch, it will be stunned, remove the ice patch, and you will be able to kill it. A short while after the first frost patch is spawned, a cloudburst deluge will spawn, which will allow one person to collect it to gain a buff. This buff will allow the player to deal with the upcoming mechanic. So during P4, Ragnaros randomly spawns Dreadflame, which is a growing fire patch originating from one position. The Dreadflame will spread and eventually take over the entire arena and thereby killing your raid. The person with the deluge buff can walk under the Dreadflame and it will be removed from the arena, and this should be the #1 priority for this person. For the rest of the guide, we will call this person the Firefighter. Apart from these mechanics, entrapping roots will spawn periodically during the fight. When Ragnaros steps into the roots, he will be stunned for a short while and take 50% increased damage. This should be done when he uses the final mechanic of this phase, called Empowered Sulphurous. Every so often, Ragnaros casts Empowered Sulphurous, which gives him a temporary buff. If he manages to hit any of the raid members with this buff active, he will wipe the raid. To counteract this, you should kite Ragnaros into the roots as soon as he starts casting Empowered Sulphurous. This marks the end of the breakdown of all the mechanics, and next we will go through the fight, phase by phase, and address how each role should deal with the mechanics in a strategic manner.
Let's go back into Phase 1. In Phase 1, we will have 3 players positioned on the outer rim of the arena. These players will be baiting the magma traps towards the edge of the room so that they occupy as little space as possible during the fight. We will never pop any magma traps during this encounter. The rest of the group will be positioned in a loose horizontal spread in melee range of the boss. The main tank and off tank will be positioned in the middle and on the right side of the boss respectively, where the melee DPS will be stacked on the left. By having this set up, the melee DPS and off tank will always have maximum uptime of their back attacks on Ragnaros. You can have alternate setups for your group in melee range, just make sure that the back is always available when a tank is holding aggro. It's also worth noting that Ragnaros will turn towards the ranged players when he's throwing the magma traps and knockbacks, so therefore it could be a good alternative to put the ranged DPS and the melee DPS on opposite sides of the boss. If you have an off tank such as a feral druid who benefits from high uptime in cat form, I would recommend that you only tank swap so that the main tank can drop their stacks. This should be done either when you have downtime in your rotation or when the main tank is getting to 6+ stacks. If you do not have this setup, you can simply swap at 4 to help out the healers. During this phase, healers should make sure to keep people topped with high mana efficient spells and ensure that the tank holding aggro is healthy, as they will be the only person taking heavy damage. For the lava wave mechanic, everybody in melee range will automatically be safe. However, the trap baiters must be wary of the waves and where they're coming from. The trap baiters must also be aware of the encounter timers. So you will weave in and out from the outer rim depending on if the next ability is magma trap or the ranged knockback. You must never be close to the edge of the room or a magma trap whenever the next spell to cast is a knockback. Melee DPS and healers can weave in and out to avoid the melee knockback and interrupt if you're confident that you will not accidentally bait a magma trap. Ragnaros is reaching 70% HP, and we will soon enter the first intermission. Ragnaros will drop his hammer and spawn 8 fire elementals at random locations. He will either drop his hammer on the left, middle, or right side of the arena. If he drops his hammer on either the left or the right side, this side will now be called the short side, meaning that the distance to the hammer is the shortest. If he drops his hammer in the middle, we will call the side with the highest add density the short side. Before you get to this stage, you will divide your group into the short side group and the long side group. Usually, we put our melee DPS and one tank on the short side group for their quick burst and crowd control. I would also highly recommend having an assigned backup player who might alternate from the long group to the short group if needed. This is usually well suited for burst AoE classes such as Elemental Shamans. They will come over and help the short group if the number of fire elementals on the short side were to exceed 3. As soon as the hammer shows the indicator of direction, the group should pre-position on their respective sides and everyone will be prioritizing bursting the closest fire elementals down to about 50% HP, as well as using crowd control to avoid the elementals getting to the hammer. Spells like Thunderstorm, Typhoon, Glyphed Holy Wrath, and Death Grip are incredibly strong utility spells here. Healers should make sure to keep people topped, as they will get chunked randomly for moderate damage until the intermission is over. Once the elementals are dying, you will stack your entire group on either the left or the right side of the boss in melee range in preparation for Phase 2. Phase 2 will begin in a stacked formation, and your primary concern during this phase will be the Whirled in Flames and Molten Seed mechanics. Tanks, remember to keep an eye on the Burning Wounds debuff during this phase. You can comfortably swap at 4 stacks. Once we reach Phase 2, the first thing that we will do is to bait our Molten Seeds. We will do this by starting off in a stacked position and having a vocal countdown for when we intend to move. When the raid leader calls out the move, we will pop a stampeding roar and run to the other side of the arena. This will drop the seeds at some point during our movement, which allows us to keep the seeds clumped and avoid any damage. We will remain stacked on the opposite side and pop a raid cooldown such as Aura Mastery or Barrier when the seeds are about to explode. After which, we will instantly go into a loose spread position and AoE the adds down. In the tips and tricks segment, I will provide you with some tips in order to handle this efficiently. But healers should be aware of high damage taken during this phase and be ready with quick and big heals. A short moment after the adds are dead, you will see your first Whirled in Flames cast. Make sure that you are pre-positioned either in max melee range or just outside of max melee range to minimize the amount of distance you need to cover to dodge the fire. The fire will engulf one of 3 areas of the arena, and if you alternate between max melee and just outside of max melee range, you will easily be able to avoid all the fire damage.
As soon as the fourth set of fire has gone out, restack on the side of the boss and prepare for the second set of seeds. Be careful of the lava waves when you're returning to the stacking point. Repeat the process of the first seeds by running to the opposite side, popping a raised CD to mitigate the explosion damage, and quickly burst the adds down. On the second set of seeds, you need to be careful as there will be an overlap between the time where the ad spawns and a lava wave. This implies that your spread after the explosion needs to be very quick or very carefully executed. Shortly after, you will have to dance again. At this point, your raid can take two directions. Either you can try to reach the second intermission before the third set of seeds, or you can stop your DPS when the boss is at approximately 43% HP, do the third seeds, and then phase the boss on the subsequent World in Flames. In general, I would recommend phasing the boss as soon as your group's DPS allows it without popping big offensive cooldowns during this phase. Ragnaros is now reaching 40% HP, and we will go into the second intermission. The group's positioning between short and long will follow the exact same logic as before. Tanks will split between left and right and pick up the lava scions. They hit quite hard, so healers be ready for some quick heals, and tanks don't be afraid to cycle your defensives. Everyone will ensure that they do not drop fire in the playable area if they get blazing heat. If your group is well coordinated, you can capture one of the fire elementals, meaning that you will bring it down to low HP and chain CC it, so that you can prolong this intermission, while your group cleans up the other fire elementals and the scions. This strategy is highly efficient as phase 3 will be a big burn phase and you do not want to waste your focus on cleaning up adds from the intermission. Once all fire elementals are dead, we will go into phase 3, which is the burst phase. If we briefly look ahead to phase 4, the hardest thing will be to manage the meteors remaining from phase 3. This implicitly means that we will want to get Ragnaros to phase 4 as quickly as possible before a lot of meteors are able to spawn. Usually, the threshold will be between 1 and 2 meteors, but if you were to exceed 2 meteors, phase 4 will be very difficult. So, back to the phase itself. Similar to phase 1, we will place the main tank in the center and melee DPS on the sides of the boss. You will still dodge World in Flames and lava waves during this period until a living meteor spawns. When it spawns, try to group the entire raid on the opposite side of the meteor and knock the meteor back when it is combustible. If the meteor gets close, you can stop knocking it and the fixated player can move away. You will repeat this process until you phase Ragnaros at 10% HP. A few percent before the phase, you will want to stop knocking the meteors and drag them towards the entrance for when the third intermission occurs. Once the third intermission occurs, the meteors will be frozen, and you should use this time to knock them further out to the edge of the room. Stack the group on one of your healers and pop a raid cooldown to minimize the environmental damage until the first frost patch spawns. While this is happening, keep knocking the meteors back. Once the first frost patch spawns, move to the frost patch while knocking the meteors back, and your firefighter should find the deluge spawn. Pick it up and quickly move towards any dread flames that are spawned. The firefighter will only be focusing on clearing dread flame throughout phase 4, so they will be taking heavy environmental damage. The firefighter should dip into the frost trap to reset their ticking environmental damage when needed. Healers should prioritize healing the firefighter and tanks during this phase. When the second frost patch spawns, allow the meteor to travel into the first frost patch to stun it, and your DPS will quickly burst it down. Continue this pattern until all meteors are dead. While this is going on, the tanks will conduct their normal tank swaps due to the burning wound, and when entrapping roots spawn, the tank who does not have threat on the boss should pre-position next to the roots and be ready to taunt Ragnaros. When Ragnaros casts Empowered Sulphurous, quickly taunt Ragnaros and let him move into the roots. Once rooted, everyone should blow cooldowns and hit Ragnaros as he takes increased damage. Repeat this mechanics until the fight is over. We will now move into the tips and tricks section of the encounter before we wrap up with a short TLDR. The tips will be in chronological order for when they occur in the encounter. Tip number 1. During phase 1, make sure that you have mobile classes that are baiting the magma traps so that they can easily dodge the incoming waves. Tip number 2. During Phase 2 Molten Seeds, you can use Big Daddy bombs from engineering to easily dispatch of the adds. Tip number 3. During Phase 2 Molten Seeds, Warrior's Blade Storm and an Elemental Shaman with Power Infusion and Elemental Mastery will quickly kill the adds. You could even cycle a Blessing of Protection onto your Feral Druid so that they can use Berserk and spam swipe for high DPS. Tip number 4. Before reaching Intermission 2, make sure to push beyond 40% HP so that you have less HP to deal with in Phase 3. If you were to face Ragnaros to 40 HP during the World in Flames cast, you get about 6 to 7 seconds of extra DPS on the boss before the intermission. You should always save all offensive cooldowns for Phase 3. Tip number 5. During Intermission 2, put a Rogue or Death Knight on the furthest elemental from the hammer to quickly bring it down to below 50 HP. Chain CC using Kidney Shot, Chains of Ice, or Death Grip to isolate it as far away from the hammer as possible, leaving you plenty of time to clear up the lava scions before phasing. Tip number 6. During Phase 3, wait until the meteor is targeting a mobile DPS class, then stop knocking the meteor and simply kite it around while DPSing to maximize the DPS uptime on the boss. Tip number 7. During Phase 4, the second Frost Patch and the first Entangling Roots will spawn approximately at the same time. You must kite Ragnaros into the roots, so stall the meteors from entering the Frost Patch until the burst window is over to maximize focused DPS on Ragnaros. When the damage is over, you can clear the meteors with ease. Tip number 8. If the Entangling Roots spawn under Ragnaros, it can be tricky to move him before he is stunned. If that happens, you can taunt and kite Ragnaros for 8 seconds while he has the Empowered Sulphurous buff up to ensure survival as a last resort. We will now go into the TLDR section of this guide. If you're looking for more details on any aspect of the fight, please refer to the breakdown chapters of this guide. Start Phase 1 in a loose horizontal spread in melee. Place 3 DPS on the outer rim of the arena to bait magma traps and do not pop them. Dodge lava waves and tank swap when necessary. 4 stacks is a comfortable level for most healers. At 70%, you will reach the first intermission. Divide your group into 2 groups, one for each side of the hammer. Quickly burst the fire elementals down to below 50% and prioritize any that are close to the hammer. Healers, be careful for the quick chunks of damage on random raid members. In Phase 2, you will stack on the right side of the arena. 1 second before Molten Seeds is cast, move in a tight stack to the opposite side of the arena with Stampeding Roar. Stack on the opposite side and blow a raid cooldown. The adds will spawn, so rearrange to a loose spread and quickly AoE them down. Be ready to dodge fire during World in Flames and then restack on the left side of the boss. Repeat the mechanics until the boss is at 40% HP. In the second intermission, repeat the steps of Intermission 1 while tanks are holding the Lava Scions. Clear up the Lava Scions ASAP and make sure that you run out to the edge of the room if you get blazing heat. Stack up on the right side for Phase 3, pop Bloodlust and all offensive cooldowns. Dodge fire during Word in Flames, and wait for the first meteor to spawn. Once spawned, run to the opposite side and continuously knock the meteor back when it has the combustible buff. Right before you reach Phase 4, at 10% HP, drag all meteors to the entrance and knock them away from the boss. In Phase 4, stack on the frost patches and knock the meteor. Tank swap per usual at 4 stacks. When the deluge spawns, send your hunter to pick it up and have them clear out the dread flame spawns on the map. When Ragnaros casts Empowered Sulphurous, kite him into the entangling roots on the map and burst him while he takes increased damage. Once the second frost patch spawns, let the meteor go into the first frost patch and kill it. Repeat the pattern until the boss is dead. For more details on this encounter, please watch the full breakdown available with the timestamps in the description. Thank you all very much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed the guide, and if you did, please make sure to leave a like and drop a comment and subscription on this channel.